Hello, hope you're doing well. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know that the artwork in this video was made as official merch for The Story of High Hopes Low Rolls, which is an original animated series that myself and some friends have been working on that retells the story of our homebrew Dungeons & Dragons campaign. The series so far is available to watch right here on YouTube, so if this speed paint gets you curious about the story itself, I'll put a link to the playlist at the end of this video and in the description so that you can check it out. We'd really appreciate the support. Anyway, with that in mind, let's get to the drawing. So I first drew this artwork before the release of Chapter 1 of High Hopes, which was a little while ago now. So this commentary might be just as much of a journey of discovery for me as it is for you guys watching, since I don't know exactly how much of this process I'm going to remember. But you know, we're going to give it a go. I had wanted to upload this footage before now, but then life kind of got in the way in a lot of ways. But I think it's worked out quite nicely that I am able to upload this particular footage now, since we actually just finished a good chunk of work on the next chapter of the animated series. I'm not going to spoil anything, but I am really excited for some of the sequences and story that are coming up. We've been employing some new methods of work and trying to streamline our animation process for this one, and it's turning out to be quite a big episode. So we're all just really excited to see it come together. It's also quite fun to be able to revisit some of this previous artwork while I have sort of what's coming next right at the forefront of my mind. So this design. Like I said, it was made with the intent of it being an art print for our store, so I wanted to make it look real swish. We also thought though that it would be really cool to make it part of an ongoing set, so like something where we'd be able to draw a new design for the set to go along with each episode of the animation that we put out. And the first theme that came to mind for that was tarot cards. If you're not familiar with the concept of tarot cards, they're basically a deck of cards with a unique and specific set of names, suits, and meanings that are typically used for fortune telling. I've always loved the idea of tarot cards solely because of the kind of aesthetics of them. There's something very, mystical about them, I think it's fair to say. But since getting a tarot deck of my own a while ago, it's been really interesting to study and find out more about the actual lore and meaning behind each card and the kind of traits that they represent. I should probably note that I'm no expert by any means, so don't expect me to go predicting the future anytime soon, but as I found out more and more about all of those deeper meanings and traits that go into all of the cards in a deck, the more it seemed like the kind of thing that would be really cool to apply to the different characters that appear in our animated series. Since there are so many cards in a full tarot deck though, we narrowed the scale of this print set down to just the major arcana. 22 cards numbered from 0 to 21 that are kind of considered to be the big players of the deck. Or at least they'd be the ones that most people would recognize at a glance. So that's where this idea began. I wrote out a list of all of the major arcana cards and thought about which characters from our D&D campaign would be best suited to each card based on the traits that they represented. And then I drew up some thumbnail sketches in my notepad. Now, since the major arcana are all numbered, it would be understandable to assume that this set of artworks would also be made in that same numerical order. Start at 0, go all the way up to 21. However, what we really wanted to do with these tarot designs was make it so that they kind of matched up with the story of whatever episode that they got released alongside. There are 2 episodes of the series out so far, and this particular artwork was made to go along with the very first one, which was kind of the pilot episode. And one of the major named characters from that episode was this guy, called Hydrasil. Hydrasil is kind of the big bad of the campaign that High Hopes is based on. Just this big monstrous dragonborn dude that you would not want to run into in a dark alley. All of which made him a pretty much perfect choice for card number 15 of the major arcana, the Devil. In tarot readings, the Devil card is generally regarded as a symbol of not good things. But it doesn't necessarily mean an evil person specifically. Like, if you pulled it during a fortune-telling session, it wouldn't be like, oh, looks like you're literally gonna meet Satan. Sorry about that. No, so, as is the case with anything to do with tarot card stuff, it's generally a lot less literal than that. To the best of my knowledge, and any legitimate witches watching, feel free to correct me in the comments, the Devil card is typically associated with materialism, envy, and addiction, among other things. In the little tarot guidebook I have on my bookshelf, it's described as a card that represents an unhealthy bond with something that is not for the greater good. Now I'm going to tell you why that description in particular made Hydrasil the perfect character choice for this card, while also trying not to give away any spoilers. So if you've seen the first episode of High Hopes, you may already be aware that Hydrasil is the champion of Tiamat, which, to translate, basically means that he is a big evil dragon man who lives in servitude to a big evil dragon god. So yeah, that whole description about an unhealthy bond with something that's not for the greater good? I'd say it doesn't get much more literal than that. For the design itself, I had already made this rectangular frame template for all of the artworks in this set, to give them that kind of classic tarot card look, and to make it so that all of the designs going forward would have the same basic layout. So the main challenge came in trying to make the design of the artwork itself fit within those proportions, since normally I don't constrain my drawings to fit within any kind of border besides the canvas itself. And, oh, here's a fun little bit of trivia. The Roman numeral that you can see at the top of that outline, that frame, was actually made by reshaping the High Hopes logo from the shield-shaped double H that it normally is, into an X and a V for 15. The numbers on all of the upcoming cards in this set are different, so the numeral at the top of each one is going to be forged in the same way, by rearranging the series logo a bit. Ultimately, it's a pretty inconsequential thing, but it's one of those little design details that I thought was really cool to be able to incorporate. I think I also mentioned that I drew some thumbnail sketches in a notepad when the idea for this artwork series first came about, so that was the starting point for the drawing process here. I scanned one of those sketches into my drawing software, which, before you ask, is Paint Tool Sci, then got to work on refining that sketch before inking it digitally. The whole concept for Hydrasil, back when we were first trying to translate his design from, something we could only see in our mind's eye when we were all sat around the game table, and into something tangible that was going to feature in the first episode of High Hopes, was that we wanted to make him look as clearly monstrous as possible. Because obviously, as anybody familiar with D&D will know, Dragonborn are already a pretty monstrous looking species as it goes, because, they're dragon people. But Hydrasil is supposed to be kind of the culmination of the worst parts of that. Just corrupted and twisted and strong as hell. And I really wanted to show off those more twisted features of his in this art card, because you only really get a glimpse of them in the first episode itself. In particular, it was really fun to put in all the detail of the spikes he has jutting out from his body, and the mean eyes and massive horns. Plus, in terms of physicality, just the fact that he is absolutely jacked, which makes him look pretty imposing. Which is good, because that's what you want in a villain, really. Oh, and fun fact, you can't see it here because it goes off the page, but Hydrasil is actually the only Dragonborn character in the story of High Hopes, or indeed in our D&D campaign in general, that has a tail. Tails are a common trait for Dragonborn in a lot of D&D campaigns, but in mine and my friend's case, we kind of collectively decided against it because we just didn't want to have to draw tails all the time if we could avoid it. But when it came to finalizing designs for the animated series, we were like, oh, but you know who could have a tail? Mr. Big Bad Dragon Man Hydrasil. It's a really cool physical feature of his that I do hope we get to show off a bit more as the series goes on, because it does really set him apart as this entity that's just something other, something worse than any of the other normal Dragonborn characters you're going to see in the show. He also has a big old 5-pronged scar on his chest, which is meant to be reflective of the symbol of Tiamat, his aforementioned big bad 5-headed dragon god. That symbol is another thing that appears briefly in the first episode of High Hopes, but only as part of the scenery. So it was fun to be able to actually turn this guy around and show off that little detail of his design in this artwork. Now, when it came to actually painting this piece, I wanted to try and make it look like it was done in a kind of watercolor style, to emulate the classic painterly tarot card aesthetic that I'm really fond of. I still wanted to give it a bit of a modern edge though, so one of the first things I did during the coloring stage was to include some geometric lines in the background area to look like light rays. I think you'll also see here that I actually tried to do the coloring for this piece twice, but the first attempt didn't go quite the way I was imagining. It wasn't quite as precise as I would have liked it. So I just saved that first attempt as a separate file and put it to the side as a color palette reference. Speaking of color palettes, I knew I wanted this card to be mostly rooted in purple, since that's one of the main colors in Hydrasil's design, but having the entire painting swathed in purple would have just left everything looking washed out and without any contrast. So I chose to color some areas in yellow to make them stand out, and then I blended any necessary areas between those two colors with some in-between shades. Anybody who's familiar with color theory, or indeed anybody who can see the big color wheel that's on screen in my drawing software right now, will be able to tell you that the reason behind that choice is the fact that yellow and purple are opposite colors, meaning that they're opposite to each other on the color wheel, and therefore when they're both used in an artwork or design, they can really make each other pop. I mostly put the yellow area in the background to act as a sort of backlight and make the silhouette of Hydrasil's head really stand out, which then meant that I was able to paint the edges of Hydrasil's body in yellow too, to give him that backlit appearance. After that, I blended those yellow edges into the purple tone of his body before going in with some darker shades of purple towards his center to carve out his musculature. I remember this being really satisfying to paint since I was trying to go for that watercolor style I mentioned. There was a lot of blending involved, and for such a dark and brooding bit of artwork, it was actually really relaxing to paint. One other key feature that I think I somehow forgot to mention until now are those orbs that you can see floating around his head. The red one might look familiar if you've seen the first episode of The Story of High Hopes, but the rest? Well, I could go into more detail about them, but then I would definitely be straying into spoiler territory. So for now, I'll just say that they were probably the most difficult part of this picture to paint. I'm glad I included them though, because the circle shape they're arranged in adds a nice extra bit of interest to the overall layout. I also included some foreground elements with these silhouettes of broken and worn down weaponry in the bottom half of the picture, both to give the composition a bit of depth with a sense of foreground, middle ground, and background, but also to imply that, like, yeah, this dude fights. Like I said earlier, the plan going forward is to make another one of these designs with each episode of our animated series that comes out, featuring a new character on each card. So while this artwork may be finished, I hope that you can look forward to seeing more of these designs in the future, as well as seeing more of our animated series itself. Anyway, that's about all I've got to say on this one. Hopefully I was able to give you some good insight here into the kind of thought process that goes into a more detailed composition like this, and hopefully you just had a good old time watching this video. Links to our print store where you can pick up a copy of this artwork for yourself, as well as links to the playlist where you can watch The Story of High Hopes Low Rolls, are both going to be available in the description of this video, so do check them out if either of them take your fancy. But for now, thank you very much for tuning in, and I hope to see you next time.